peoples come to work, so my peoples come first. I got worldwide family all over the earth, and I worry about them all for whatever it's worth.
Bill Sterling and Alexandra Gardner, they're with Indigo Theory, which is an ethical hacker collective, and they'll describe what that means in more detail and some of the work they did in the Blockchain for Social Impact Incubator earlier this year with Team Wolfpack. And Karen Bhatia, whom I've worked with very closely on our Stanford Startups Group and has been working now with the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and very excited to hear about all the different efforts that we're doing here in the city of New York, where I'm also based. And Adam Wiedemann with the city of Austin, where they've developed some interesting solutions for the homeless population, identity-based solutions called MyPass, and actually really worked with Blockchain for Social Impact in an advisory capacity as well. So we were very excited to work very closely with Adam earlier this year. Just very quickly, I myself, I've been moderating or been emceeing this morning, and I'm on the advisory board at Blockchain for Social Impact. I'm a technology consultant in cloud, blockchain, and governance. I'm also based here in the New York area. I'm an advisor to the governance group, which focuses on a lot of CSR advisory services globally. And so I think that intersection with a lot of the solutions they're trying to build here is very exciting. And then also involved in the public cloud implementations for a lot of major firms globally, with a lot of questions around privacy and security, et cetera. I wanted to turn it over to Adam, if you wanted to begin with some thoughts on what you've been doing with the city of Austin.
Sure. So I'm Adam Wiedemann, as you mentioned. I've been working on a solution called MyPass, which helps people who are experiencing homelessness hold on to digital notarized copies of their very important documents. That way, when it comes time to sign up for services such as housing or jobs, and you need to bring things like your social security card, perhaps a birth certificate, perhaps a physical ID, that if you lost your physical copies of those things, you would have these notarized copies, which could allow you to continue the services process without having to take the delay required to go get your IDs back. And so we have been, as far as digital identity platforms go, this is a little bit different in that we see people utilizing their important documents to verify parts of their identity. And then we are simply using MyPass as a large collector for all of that.
Great, thank you, Adam. Karen?
Sure, thank you for having me on. At the New York City Economic Development Corporation, as a quick background, we are considered the city's economic engine. And in that respect, the team that I'm a part of focuses on industry and technology development as a means for growing good jobs here in New York. And the team that I lead is focused on particularly the creative sectors as well as applied technologies. In relation to blockchain, what we have been focusing on over the course of the past several years has been profoundly focused on education, both of government and what exactly is blockchain technology. And then secondly, public education about what the technology is and where it could potentially be applied, both in terms of government applications and commercial applications as well. So over the course of the past couple of years, we developed New York City's blockchain strategy. It consisted of 3 prongs. The first one was a pilot that we did for 1 year, where we had a physical space, the New York City Blockchain Center, located in the Flatiron District, and it essentially was a community center where anybody who was interested in blockchain could come. We had classes that were open to the public. We had classes that were more development and technology oriented. We had a number of events focused on regulation, and we also had a number of resources for startups. The second prong was focused particularly on government applications and setting the foundation for potential future use cases and pilots of blockchain technology. We call that Big Apps for Blockchain. It's a civic tech competition where we focus particularly on blockchain applications in identity, asset management, and energy efficiency. And the third prong is working closely with CoinDesk for to put together May's Blockchain Week, New York City Blockchain Week. This year it was virtual, but it was the third year in which we focused on partnering with them in order to have a variety of different events throughout the city, focused on a number of use cases, applications, and making sure that blockchain is accessible to New Yorkers across the board. And so fundamentally, these three prongs have been focused on, as I mentioned, access, but also thinking through why is this technology so transformative, and how do we make sure that New Yorkers understand it and also are able to participate in it, both from an understanding basis, but also as potential employees and also founders later on down the line.
Thanks, Karen. So I think there are a lot of different ways, I think, for the private sector and public sector to collaborate in New York. I think is engaged in a lot of different interesting efforts there. Bill Sterling, would you be able to introduce yourself and Indigo Theory and your solution at the Wolfpack solution that you're involved with?
Yeah, I'd love to. So just to start, we concentrate on product design, UX strategy, and hacking for social issues. Personally, I enjoy improvising as an artist and a designer, and using my skills to take on like community issues. And as a collective, we like to take on things like mental health and school shooters, the COVID supply chain, racism, and the homeless. Indigo Theory is rooted in empathy. So we take pride in actually defining what the problems are, talking to real people, talking to those who are doing good, and just getting assessment of the land. Now actually going out in the streets and talking to users and getting an idea of what they go through on a day-to-day basis is really what drives Indigo Theory from the big issues that we're drawn to. So while technology and blockchain has really allowed us to work with people all over the world and really open up a world of infinite possibilities, it's really played a major role in causing much, if not most, of the problems that it's tried to help. So this is our sweet spot. This is where we listen and basically design the balance of technology and usability and innovation and sustainability. So I'll let Alex describe how we've used those principles in Wolfpack.
Thank you. Alex, go ahead.
Okay, so I am Alex Gardner. I'm one of the co-founders of Indigo Theory. As you had mentioned, Robbie, it's an ethical hacker collective. So what that means is when Bill and I started Indigo Theory, we were just hackers competing in hackathons. We had a very unique perspective because we are user experience and product designers, which in the blockchain space, it's very dominated by developers. And so the projects that we were competing with and winning generally were focused on social issues. And so once we started competing and once we started, gaining sort of recognition and notoriety, we had people reaching out to us globally that were like, what are you guys doing? How can we join, your projects? We want to work with you. And so that was really how Indigo Theory started. It was very clear that there was hackers in the community that wanted to make an impact and wanted to be involved and just kind of needed the right guidance and sort of research and user experience design behind it to make that possible. So over the course of the last year, I think we've competed in 5 hackathons that we've placed in every single one. One of those projects was Wolfpack, which was a project completely focused on redesigning how we interact and view the homeless communities. And one of the biggest takeaways from our research was that the homeless community is in fact just that. It's a community with its own sort of governance and rules and culture, how they interact with one another, how they behave, how they view themselves in sort of an ecosystem with the rest of the community. And so we quickly realized that the solutions that were taking place really weren't taking into account this user experience perspective for the homeless. And so what we went to work doing, and this was with the years of research. So we went out into the homeless communities, we interviewed them, we talked with them, we went and talked to several nonprofits in the city of Denver to really kind of understand what's working and what's not. And one of our biggest takeaways was that the current infrastructure doesn't really support the homeless lifestyle, meaning they're very transient. They don't have a set schedule. They're not necessarily predictable. And so when we hear comments like, well, why don't you just go get a job? It's like, well, there's not really a job ecosystem that takes into account their lifestyle and the very sort of difficult adversities that they're facing. And so what we went out to create was essentially a gig ecosystem. So you could be a person that's transient, identifies as homeless. You might not have the ability to work, a regular 40-hour-a-week job. A lot of the jobs that a homeless person could be qualified for tend to be not only lower paying, but they're very ununderstanding. It's not the correct word, but they're not understanding of what it means to be homeless. So finding an employer that takes into account that the person that you're employing might not have eaten in a couple days, or they might not have taken a shower, or they might not have slept. And so trying to hold them to the standard that you would hold a normal person and expect them to work this 40-hour-a-week job or show up on a regular schedule, like that's just not possible. So we went and created a gig economy ecosystem, working with employers that not only, one, are very understanding of the fact that they're employing homeless individuals, but two, creates a token-based economy where they're not being paid out in cash, they're actually being paid out in tokens that give them more buying power than what you would find on food stamps or specialized government funding that has very, very strong restrictions on it. And so that's what Wolfpack was. It was a winner in the BSIC hackathon, as well as the Impact Award winner and Judge's Choice winner for the Ethereum Denver Hackathon in 2020.
Great, thank you. I think all of us here at BSIC are really excited to kind of watch the Wolfpack presentation and see how that has evolved over time. So that's great. Adam, I'd love to get your thoughts kind of on your experience with the population, the homeless population, because I know MyPass was developed to tackle some of the challenges in terms of the identity solutions for this population, and as you mentioned earlier, what documentation they have, whether it's notarized or not, and the nature of that population. Sometimes they're going in and out of, unfortunately, even correctional facilities. And kind of to contrast or maybe add and complement to what Alex was saying about the nature of that demographic and how we have to build solutions that are effective for them, and also, frankly, solutions that they can trust.
Yeah, Alex did a great job of talking about what it's like working with that community. It's very different than the other solutions that you would design for, the other customers that you would design for, and other solutions. As you mentioned, just signing on to an app, it can be really difficult if you're experiencing homelessness. And so the things that we take for granted, like we can remember a password, or if we can't remember a password, perhaps we've stored that password on a cell phone that we don't lose, or right, it's on our home computer that we keep at our home. Right? These are things that people who are experiencing homelessness often don't have. And so it was really challenging for us to find, well, first we were looking for a least common denominator. Okay, what thing is accessible across the board? And the more that we looked into this, we realized there wasn't a thing. It wasn't like this one magical thing that everyone who was experiencing homelessness could use. Many people, when we talk to them, say, "Oh, biometrics. Everybody has fingerprints. You should, for sure use biometrics." Although everyone does have fingerprints, in the homelessness space, the fear of being tracked, and oftentimes rooted in some conspiracy theories, but oftentimes is actually correct. The fear of being tracked digitally is really pervasive, such that the majority of the folks that we talk to are just outright uncomfortable with using any solution that is using part of their biometrics. So whether that's taking a picture of their face, capturing fingerprints. And so the way that we solved this is we built a this very secure document app, but then we partnered it with an OAuth server that allowed them to log in on whatever mode that they were comfortable with, right? So if you can remember a password, there's a place for you to keep a password. If you are okay with biometrics, there's a place for you to utilize biometrics. If you can't remember, if you're not okay with either of those, but you have someone in the community who recognizes you, there's a place for social attestation, right? And so essentially we were, rather than just finding one thing, one silver bullet that solved everything, we tried to throw as many options as we could possibly put in front of a person in order that at that day, the option that they needed would be there for them. And that's another thing, which is the place where you are at from a capability standpoint might be different when you signed up as when you need to log on to this thing months or even years later. And so because of that, we tried to just put as many different options as we could in there. The social attestation piece is really big. That's oftentimes how people in the homelessness community verify their identity anyway. Well, so-and-so knows me. And so being able to bring that into this application was really important. But the other thing, and we struggle with this a lot, was the balance between security and accessibility. And so where we approached this, we approached it to make it the most accessible. So we started with accessibility, and then we put security on top of that, as opposed to the other way around, as opposed to starting with something that was very secure and then finding ways to walk people through that high level of security. Just the exhaustion that folks get from going through many screens that are trying to break down that complex task. Like that exhaustion is very real, and it's a thing that stops people from continuing your process. And so rather than doing it, approaching it that way, we approached it the other way, where we made it very accessible. And then on the back end, we did what was necessary in order to make it secure. So for example, a 4-digit password is not very secure, right? It might be something we can remember, but it's not very secure. Well, if there is a 4-digit password on the back end, we can eliminate the number of retries such that you only get 2 tries per day. Well, now that 4-digit password has become much, much more secure, right? That's a much harder thing to brute force. And so, right, essentially just taking the things that we could do, applying that in order to not sacrifice that ability for people to get on. Because at the end of the day, the thing that we were serving was a secure place for them to keep their documents, where their documents would always be accessible to them, right? And so, yeah, but so that was incredibly challenging. And the second thing that was really difficult for us was finding a way to work with large organizations and government organizations to make these digital documents acceptable replacements of the original copies. And in some cases, it's not going to be. It's in the places where we're dealing with government. Yeah. There's, fortunately for us, there were legislative paths that we could align with, which is why we chose notarization. But in places where we're arguing with the owner of an apartment complex as to why they need a physical ID instead of a notarized copy of one, that they're allowed to set their own rules, right? And so so where we could make change, we did, but we recognize that that's not a slam dunk. This is going to take it's going to take a while for digital copies of things to be able to have that same acceptance just across the board as physical copies of things.
No, thank you. I think that's really insightful, and I think congratulations on putting that together. you know, you did talk about this, there's this intersection between the government body, so the city of Austin, Texas in this case, nonprofits and private sector firms, startups, et cetera, that are all involved in many ways in building solutions. Karen, I wanted to get your thoughts, because I know the New York Blockchain Center had goals around bringing the private sector to collaborate with cities and with the municipality in a more effective manner, to collaborate with each other to build solutions. How do you see that evolving over time to build more of these types of solutions, be able to work with governments to enable adoption, that balance between security and accessibility that Adam talked about?
That's exactly right, Ravi. That's one of the goals that we had for the Blockchain Center. And it was one of the primary areas that we focused on for that Civic Tech Challenge that I mentioned, Big Apps for Blockchain. What we had found is through this competition, and as I mentioned, it ended up evolving to focus on 3 areas, identity being one of them, asset management the other, and the third is energy efficiency. As the private sector, the nonprofit sector, as well as government were working together, what we had found was that there are a few components that are critical in order to make blockchain something that is more understandable and also potentially a solution to some of the challenges that government may be facing. So what we first tried to address was a better understanding of what is blockchain. So that's what we tried to tackle both with the center so that the public, the general public could come to these Blockchain 101 classes during their lunchtime or after work, just to get just a basic understanding of what is this technology. But we also focused very much, as I mentioned earlier, on thinking about government and helping government better understand this. So we had free classes as well for anybody, whether it was in city, state, federal, elected officials, anybody who was interested. We had a really great turnout. We were really impressed by this. They were intrigued with what is blockchain, what are its applications. So the first part, I think that's incredibly important across the board for the public and private sector to work together and to actually have potential use cases, pilots, and then real applications at scale. The first part, I think, is education across the board, which is going to be critically important. The second part is making sure that whatever the technology is used for, it's actually solving a real problem. It's not just adoption of technology for technology's sake, something new and shiny, blockchain is all the rage, let's try to adopt this internally in government. And so we worked very closely with the agencies that continuously had come to our workshops, our educational workshops, to start going more in depth into what are the problems and challenges that they're trying to solve for. And being very straightforward with them, whether it was through EDC, New York City Economic Development Corporation, working directly with them, or in these instances, we did have organizations, particularly nonprofit organizations, as well as the private sector coming in and helping to facilitate these deep dives with these agencies. And these, nonprofit or private sector organizations were ones who had expertise with some of the potential challenges that the government and agencies were facing. So we did deep dives to better understand what are the challenges and does blockchain make sense? In some instances, maybe it was just adopting a database or a more structured database or some sort of workflow software instead of, integrating blockchain. And so we were very straightforward in going into what is the problem and does blockchain make sense here? The third part was helping government understand what really is the value add of blockchain. In what instances is this really going to provide some sort of a unique solution when it came to trust, security, transparency, tracking, what are the benefits that could be involved here? And then the fourth part of what we focused on was this is where that challenge came into bear. And so we opened up, the 3 challenges that we ended up focusing on, as I mentioned earlier, the 3 topics, these were actually generated by the agencies themselves. These were the agencies that consistently showed an interest in these topics. They were looking for solutions to the problems in these areas as well. So there was that buy-in, and they had internal champions who were interested in learning more about this. And so we tapped the public at large, private sector, nonprofit organizations, anybody who was interested, even individuals, to develop solutions to these areas. And so that particular instance of this civic tech challenge that focused primarily on education, but then crowdsourcing solutions, was our way of bringing together all of these sectors to think through what are some ways in which this technology could really be a unique value add and solution to some of the challenges that government is facing. So I think, the main thing that I would underscore is the education aspect that I think is incredibly important, particularly going back to what Adam had said when it comes to concerns about accessibility and security. One of the big concerns that government has is security primarily, and also the public as well, making sure that there's trust in these applications across the board. And so that's why we focused on this dual approach regarding education of government and also education of the public too.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of topics to cover in this whole framework, and I know we're a little bit short of time, and we have a lot of interesting things to cover. I wanted to just quickly conclude when we were obviously all preparing, and we're not going to be able to do any justice to this topic, but there are other technologies obviously that we're also bringing to bear as we try and produce solutions around for our urban environment. So I know we were talking about kind of blockchain, also the intersection with AI and machine learning. And Alex, I know you had some thoughts, Alex and Bill, you had some thoughts to share on relative to the team of this conference. How do we ensure that all these technologies are deployed in a manner that's equitable and accessible across our population, and not for whatever reason biased or discriminatory in any way? So if you just want to share a couple of quick thoughts as we conclude, Bill and Alex.
Oh, yeah. So this is actually one of our presentations for Denver Startup Week, which is, how do we make the blockchain space more accessible to people who are not in tech? And so, when you look at the blockchain demographic, it's obviously IT people that have sort of funneled into the blockchain space. And so you start to see those sort of extremes or polarization of the demographics that you do in IT. And so, how do we make it not only more inclusive, but more diverse, remove barriers to entry? And, one of the sort of common mantras that Bill and I share is just remove blockchain from the conversation. Like, remove the word blockchain, DAO, sort of Internet of Things, like remove it from the conversation, because as soon as you start to get into this very techie language, it makes people feel inferior, and it makes them feel like this is out of my scope. This is not something that I understand. And so one of our biggest learning lessons, especially when working with the homeless populations, is don't even bring up the word blockchain. Incentivize them to be curious about the platform. So one of the sort of positive reinforcement steps that we did for onboarding was, you sign up with us, we will automatically load your account with $5. So kind of similar to what a Robinhood does, or, Chase banking app, you sign up, they give you some deposit into your account. We really needed to incentivize people to, one, be interested into it, and two, see that we really, really focused on that user experience to make it accessible and remove these sort of barriers to entry, which is maybe you don't always have a reliable phone. Maybe you don't always have access to internet. Maybe you don't always have somewhere where you can charge your device. And so in working with a lot of the nonprofits, one of the key takeaways that we got was, get an email address. An email address is gold. We can follow them with an email address. Cell phone numbers change, their phone changes. Don't make it localized to the phone. Make it something that they can access on cloud. So if there's a computer that we have for them in the local library or the United High Mile Way Center, then at least we have some sort of backup. And so one of the biggest things is we kind of talk about, how can we get people who are not normally accustomed to this world and to this language interested in it? And so our presentation for Denver Startup Week was decentralized autonomous organizations and their ability to aid in social revolution. And we really focused on not so much what a DAO, sort of the blockchain aspect of it, but how the structure and architecture of how it operates can influence all these different areas in our day-to-day society that we see social injustices taking place, and how blockchain can help revolutionize and break that. And so we really kind of focused on its influence and its impact as opposed to the underlying technology and how it works.
Thank you, Alex. I know there's a lot more we would want to cover here, but we're going to move on to our next panel. So thank you, Karen, Bill, and Adam. We'll ensure that information and contact information is provided on all the panelists here and all the other panels, so you'll be able to get in touch with them as well.
Everybody down the road.